No, I think about myself as Everett frequently. But I think about myself. What would I do if I was in his shoes? It was so dramatic. It's got this inherent narrative of drama and martyrdom. Even though he was not interested in being a martyr or a hero or having any kind of profile, his story sort of changed the trajectory for the queer community in Canada.
We're standing on 14th Street, and it's a fairly notable house, the Birkenstock House. It's where the Klippert family lived in 1933. They rented the house, and sadly, Everett's mother died when they were living here. Everett's sister Leah, who was about 20 years older, started taking on that mother role and taking care of the family.
I'm interested in Everett because he grew up here. He has the same city as I do. I'm really curious about his life and his struggles. And I also want his story to be remembered by Canadians because it's an important story and it led to the decriminalization of homosexuality in Canada. My undergraduate degree is in zoology and psychology. I had a double major. One night at the family dinner table, it was a Sunday night, I just, out of the blue, a sort of curious thought occurred to me. I was like, where did gay people go in the 60s? And that got me really curious about the gay community's history. And then, so that's led me down this sort of rabbit hole of becoming a historian and exploring the city's gay history.
So Dad, when did you move to Calgary?
1960.
And what was Calgary like then?
Well, a small city, just over 200,000 people.
We're coming up to the Palliser Hotel here, and you told me once that you knew gay men were drinking in this tavern here, right at this door.
Yeah, that was our understanding at the time. I guess over meetings with different friends and people, and it was just, that sort of knowledge just was told, and that's just how I was aware of it.
I remember when I asked you and Mom said there were no gay people back then. She was joking though. But people didn't really talk about it that much.
No, it was very sort of underground at that time. So, but people were still aware. I mean, yeah. So.
In history research, there's something called presentism, where you judge the past by today's values, and it's something that can cloud historical research. You have to try and understand things in their own context. I try and think about Everett's life in the context of his time, and the choices he made in the context of that time. Everett Klippert was born in Kindersley, Saskatchewan in 1926. He moved to Calgary at the age of 2. He came from a big Baptist family, 9 siblings altogether. All his formative years were in Calgary, and he grew up here. He went to school here, made it to grade 8, and then he started working. His father was a manager at a grocery store in Bridgeland, and then he started working after that at a dairy, Union Dairy, and he did that for several years and then got a job as a bus driver for Calgary Transit. He was very friendly. People loved riding his bus. And there's anecdotal stories of people waiting for his bus, right? Like an earlier bus would come and they'd go, no, we'll catch the next one. We're catching Everett's bus. So one of the young men he was having an affair with, and there's not much detail in the court records about his relationships, but the father of the young man found out about his son's relationship with Everett and contacted the police. They searched his home and they found a little black book, which was his dating record in Calgary, and they found 17 other names of men in the book. And he was then given 18 charges of gross indecency, which was the charge that homosexuals were convicted under. Back in the 50s and 60s, if you were charged with gross indecency, often your name and your home address and your occupation was published in the daily newspapers the next day, the Calgary Herald and the Albertan, which was the predecessor to the Calgary Sun. Former bus driver jailed 4 years for indecency. The stakes were high. You didn't want to get yourself named in the paper because then everyone would find out your secret. And across the country, there were men whose lives were destroyed, who lost their families and or sometimes committed suicide. He was a very mild-mannered prisoner. He kept to himself. And he got out in 1964. There's some sources that say he got out early for good behavior. He felt a lot of shame. He came from a big Baptist family here in Calgary, and so wanted to sort of get out of Dodge and find a job somewhere. He moved to the Northwest Territories and really thrived there. He had lots of friends. His boss loved him. His coworkers really enjoyed working with him. And then the mine manager, who was not popular, someone tried to burn down his house. And so the local RCMP officer looked at everyone who had a criminal record, and Klippert's file came up because of his jail time. Everett at one point in the 60s alleged that this officer said he was going to be charged with arson unless he, told him the truth about his sexual activities in the Northwest Territories, sort of intimidated him. But Everett confessed to having had sex with 4 men up in the Northwest Territories, and so that brought him in trouble with the Crown again up there. There was a trial, and he was convicted again and sent to jail. In that court case, there were 2 psychiatric assessments done of Everett, and they both said he was such a nice guy, so gentle. Jail wasn't actually the right place for him, but the judge in that case convicted him. And then the Crown went a step further and decided to have him prosecuted as a dangerous sexual offender, likely to reoffend. And so the court psychiatrists agreed that he would, if he got out of jail, would likely have sex with men again. And so he was a menace to himself and a menace to Canadian society. And that's what was the pivotal difference in his court case that made its way all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court trial, I believe, was largely driven by his sister Leah here in Calgary, who was a legal secretary and sort of kind of knew her way around the legal system, and always thought that her brother's incarceration was unjust. And so she kept challenging it. And I think Everett himself might have just languished in jail or just, head down. I don't want to deal with the situation. But she was trying to get him out. Hi, Kathy.
Hi, Kevin. It's so nice to finally meet you. Come on in here.
Thanks.
Come on in.
When you knew him as an adult, he always seemed like a happy, laid back, like he could laugh easily. But he had this very dark period in the 60s where he spent for most of the decade in jail.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people might be bitter from that experience. What do you think? How did he get through that?
I don't know. I think it's been said by a lot of people that a person needs just one other person that believes in them to bring them out of a dark space. Just one person saying, I love you, I believe in you, I hope the best for you. And I think that was my mother to Everett, And also it could be his faith in the God of his understanding. Yeah. Because I don't think Everett went to church, but I certainly think he had a relationship with his creator.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
And that served him well. Yeah, that blows my mind why he wasn't a bitter man. I think Everett was 5 and Mom was 25 when their mother died of kidney failure. But Mom pretty well raised those boys. My mother was determined to help her brother any way she could. I just think she doesn't think that God's a condemning God. I don't think my mother had a broad picture.
She wasn't a social justice warrior for the whole gay community.
No, she was focused in on Everett and what Everett meant to her. She knew that it was wrong.
She was pretty tough. She took it all the way.
Yeah, she dug deep and she found her courage.
A lower court ruling that would make every practicing homosexual in Canada liable to imprisonment for life was upheld today by the Supreme Court of Canada in a 3-2 decision. The majority ruling dismissed an appeal by Everett George Klippert, a 40-year-old mechanic sentenced to an indefinite period of preventative detention as a dangerous sexual offender.
Well, I think it's absolutely ridiculous that any man in our society today would be put in jail for because they are affected by social disease.
If they passed a law tomorrow that no man and woman in Canada for 5 years could sleep together, what would happen, Barbara? It's the same thing. You can't force people against human behavior to do something.
I think the view we take here is that there's no place for the state in the bedrooms of the nation.
In '69, Pierre Trudeau brought forward the legislation that it would now be legal for 2 consenting adults in the privacy of their own home, age 21 or older, to have conjugal relations. That meant that Everett Klippert changed the law. Ironically, and there's no clear reason why, he languished in jail until 1971 before he was released, and kind of just had a very quiet life for the rest of his life.
This is where Everett and Mom and Dad, their ashes are put underneath this rock. When Everett was
passing away up in the Bashaw Hospital, Dorothy contacted me and told me that Everett, his last request was to be buried with his sister, my mother, who had championed him so well. So I didn't hesitate. I said, certainly.
It's really nice. It's nice.
Yeah.
It's nice for you to honor
Aw,
Everett.
I loved him.
It's a lovely tribute.
I do feel a responsibility to the spirit of Everett Klippert, and I sometimes question what I'm doing because I know he was a very private person, so I feel conflicted a little bit about publicizing his life, but I also feel like his story teaches the country an important lesson, and maybe teaches the world an important lesson. Human rights struggles are continual, they're an ongoing process. It's not black and white, it doesn't start and end. Exploring injustice, I think, puts us in touch with our humanity.